Rob Gregson.
Sean Jones. So I'm Eva from the campaign group Guerns Against Discrimination, which came together earlier this year to push for the anti-discrimination legislation and to raise awareness in the community of discrimination on the island and the importance of educating yourself. With the proposals now passed unanimously, it's imperative for us that the next elected candidates are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed within the proposed timeline. We're each going to ask you a question. My question is, for the legislation to be effective, do you think people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
Yes, well, I'm totally behind raising awareness, for those jurisdictions, and I think that it's so important to have the backing of different companies as well. Just being there on the steps of the court and just having all the people there, I think it was so important for the deputies at the time to see how important it is for this legislation to go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. There's probably people don't realise that they may be being prejudiced. I think sometimes they probably need a bit of education. Some people may not, through no sense of malice, just be ill-informed, and they may need to say that you have a responsibility to do the right thing by law. It'd be helping them out actually by helping them to comply with what is, after all, a fair expectation in modern society.
I work for a big company, NCP Department. We have a lot of training, and there's a lot that comes down from head office in the UK and in Europe about diversity training. So I think a lot of local companies will need some training, but you won't have to go around and train everybody, because a lot of the corporate headquarters are already ahead of where we are over here, which is benefiting a lot of people that work in that environment. There is a lot of ingrained, we all have ingrained prejudices we need to be made aware of, the biggest of which is racism. We come from decades of behaviour that needs to change. We all have it, we're not even aware that we have it. So education is absolutely key. And it might be seen that we want to make changes in the next 4 years, but it can take a long time to wash out. I know they're doing a lot in school, and it's right to start with the children, because you might want to have a time frame of 20, 30 years in mind rather than 4 years. So it means you need to work with people across all society, and as that change happens from school children, it washes through society, and we'll end up in 30 years radically different from where we were 30 years ago.
My question is, been very much the elephant in the room when it comes to the anti-discrimination legislation, and it's on the protective characteristic of trans, which isn't in there at the moment, but we know that it's going to come back, and it's in regards to the discrimination legislation. How will you respond to the challenge of trans people in single-sex spaces? Legislation for
that. Oh, what a harsh question for someone.
Well, I think the most important thing is, like I said before, is just raising awareness and educating people about trans awareness, and making it part of the legislation. It goes without saying, in my opinion. I know over here, unfortunately, there is still a lot of discrimination that goes against the trans community, and unfortunately, that needs to change. So that is my.
Fair enough. I think it's not so much of a rights for trans people as much as a human right to have privacy when you need it, to feel comfortable in the facilities which are available to you at work. And obviously anti-bullying is, that may be an aspect of, especially for younger people, in schools, that needs to be addressed. And luckily, they're doing a great job in primary schools of addressing it.
I take that all back, so I think I misunderstood the question. Sorry, would you ask it again?
So the question, in regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people and same-sex spaces?
Could you explain what that means?
So basically, there's been people that oppose trans people, and it's typically, especially trans women, accessing female toilets.
Well, that is the question I thought you asked.
And that was pretty much the question, and how in legislation will we look at this.
I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know what the best way forward is. So I'm in that camp where I think there are potentially there are some safeguarding issues. I don't know how it would safeguard everybody in that space. That's my view. So I don't know what the answer is.
Do we want to open it up to
Can you help me out on that? Can you take
you're-
a step forward in that?
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, you.
Yeah, so from my point of view, I obviously don't want to put my opinion in there at the moment because I'm just asking everyone the same question, but if you would like to discuss more, then I'd be really happy for you to contact me or contact Liberate, and then we can discuss it.
I was going to say, if you were given the data, the hard data in front of you, that is pro-trans rights, would you have any issue with that?
No, I don't have an issue with that. I just don't know the answer.
So if you were given a hard facts
completely open mind.
and a debate.
Prejudiced in any way. I honestly don't know what the right answer is.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
We're not trying to make it
No, no.
difficult.
It wasn't a difficult question.
Which came together earlier this year to push for the anti-discrimination legislation to raise awareness in the community of discrimination on the island and the importance of educating ourselves on how to create a more inclusive society. With the proposals now passed unanimously, it's imperative for us that the next elected candidates are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed within the timeline.
And I'm Netty from Liberate, and two questions.
So my question is, for the legislation to be effective, do you think that people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
Yes, absolutely. I was actually engaged with the Chamber of Commerce at the time when discrimination legislation was going through, and I could see some more negative responses. And I think it comes from, I do believe people want to do good, but as a business, you don't know how, and you really don't have the tools. And so I think support and education and raising awareness, I think, is really important, especially at the small ones.
I think education is a massive step that we need to make, because I think our community is unaware of the lack of awareness almost. Particularly in businesses and the way that businesses believe that being more, having more equality is going to cost them more money, which isn't necessarily the case. It's understanding what they need to do rather than assuming it's new legislation, therefore it will cost us more money. It's not realistic, and it's also not helping it's hurting the chances of these things moving forward. If the business aren't on side, we can't get anywhere. So we do need to make sure within the legislation we ensure education is getting done.
Okay, the next question, and this is sort of the elephant in the room with this question, quite a difficult one, and it's on the characteristic of trans. In regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people in single-sex spaces within the legislation?
As far as I'm concerned, I think that it's a non-issue. I think everyone needs to. You have to treat people as people in regard disregard the way that they categorise the POS. We can't be, I think that we can't just willing to take that step.
I must say, I don't know the intricacies of, the legal side of things and stuff like that. So I would like to do more research in terms of how we can best address its shares in terms of if we are seeing discrimination legislation, it should be involved in its character. Thank you.
No, that was very clear. That was what was
We haven't reached this one yet, so it's a bit like
We become more efficient as well.
Yeah. What is it?
Sorry, I'm sort of from Guernsey and I did say chicken. I'm just interested with the legislation is now, it's been decided that the legislation can be written. What do you think you can do to support that to actually happen rather than to, or do you want to oppose it? Or what's your thoughts on how we can make this happen? How can we get it so it is actually on the statute books here and if it's not?
I think from my perspective, we will put it all committees. I might be interested in I would want to raise that. What does that mean for businesses? What does it mean for economic development? To make sure different committees look at it from their perspective. Whichever committee I would.
So you did raise the profile of the legislation in that area. And do you think that would be positive? You talked about, you think more on the commerce side of it, and obviously that's where you come from. So do you think, could you actually practically support that then within that area?
I would move the subject away that it's cost, and I think Josh mentioned, let's move away that it's something costly. It's just it's a value, it's a principle. If we believe in it, that's the right thing to do. Let's just go ahead. We will have better society. We will have better business. We will attract more people to come and work with you. So really change the narrative.
I think keeping it as something that's high priority and publicly spoken about a lot. For me, I'm partly why I'm running this to make sure this happens. It's a really big issue for me. One of the things that I feel like I'll have to want to resist doing is trying to make any changes to make it better, because that becomes another problem. Will it then pass? Because that's my big fear, is that actually it will come through, and then because it's a new state, it might not pass as into legislation. But also, while there is, for example, making it actually independently our own, funding that in the way that we wanted to see it funded, it's something that I'd love to make a change to. I feel like maybe resisting doing that might be a better step in terms of actually making sure it passes through, which is a really difficult thing to do. It's kind of that battle of what you really want and what might be the most practical way of ensuring there is that protection there, because I think we do need to start down that road. It's that phase 1 and then the phase 2 as soon as possible, because it's just too long at this point. If we could ideally get it down into one phase, but I think that might be something that makes it even just a little bit more difficult to get past a few people who are going to be against it or kind of on the fence. It's a big step.
I think somebody's stood up to ring the bell actually.
Okay, so if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, just saying your name.
Hello, my name is Kay.
Mary Lowe.
John as well.
So I'm Eva from the campaign group Guerns Against Discrimination, which came together earlier this year to push for the anti-discrimination legislation. and with the proposals passed unanimously, it's imperative for us that the next elected candidates are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed in the proposed timeline, and that ensuring equality is prioritised.
And I'm Netty from Liberate.
We're both going to ask you a question. So mine is, for the legislation to be effective, do you think that people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
I'm happy to. Yeah, I think absolutely, because personally, whilst I've always said that legislation is important, ultimately information is important, because legislation doesn't always solve everything. It doesn't help in the end to change culture. So there's a place, and it doesn't need to be too complicated, I think, but obviously the Equality and Rights organisation isn't being progressed. I did say in the last term I thought we could start with a shadow commissioner who will give advice, training, help, mediate where necessary, and that sort of thing I think really helps to calm people's, those that are nervous about this, calm people's nerves. So I still like that to be prioritised.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad we need legislation, isn't it? You know, you'd like to think that it's not required in this day and age, but sadly it is, and that's good, because again, it's the minority that's for it for the majority. I think most people accept you know, how you should operate on this part of the legislation that we've got coming forward. So, I mean, I think, well, I know from the last States meeting that they're very keen to get this through because it's been a long time coming. So I obviously support it, but I supported it this term, I'm going to support it next term.
So yeah, I echo those thoughts really. It's something that's been on the agenda and needs to be, you know, dotted and T's crossed and finished.
Okay, and I've got a slightly difficult question now. It's sort of the elephant in the room question, as I call it. Well, it's been something that's come up and it's been challenging, and this is, as trans comes into the legislation, it's not necessarily listed as one of the characteristics at the moment, but it's going to come up, or is likely to come up again in the next term. In regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people in single-sex spaces?
Well, I'm going to go first again. This is a difficult one, because there are rights for example, very strong feminists who feel that where you're dealing with trans rights, they overlap on the rights of feminists who feel that exclusive female spaces for XX people as opposed to XY people who might be trans are difficult to manage. So I don't think we're going to resolve that. The rest of the world has been trying to resolve it. Having said that, I'm a francophile, and cultures are all different, and it doesn't seem to me that the issue is such a big issue on the intimate space issue in France as it is perhaps in the Anglo-Saxon world. Where I find that the trans issue is going to cause difficulty is probably in being able to talk and discuss it in a calm and measured manner, because I think people quickly jump to conclusions and get polarised. So I hope we can resolve it, but I don't think it's going to be any easier than anywhere else in the world.
I don't disagree with that. I think it's going to be through education as well, and taking people with you. I mean, you go back sort of 10 years, 20 years. I mean, there is no way the States or Ireland really accepted gay marriage and all the issues that came with that. So it's come with time that actually people have accepted, you know, you live your life how you want to live your life, you're free to live your life, and to accept that. So I see that as one that actually will build on during time. Sorry. So yeah, I think I'm a bit like Jonathan. I don't think it will happen straight away. But that said, when the legislation comes forward, I mean, it will be up to people to actually get in touch with the States at that time and settle the case. And if it needs an amendment, if it's not included, so we'll have to take it to the States and see what can happen about it. Doesn't mean to say if it's not in there it can't happen, because amendments can go to the legislation at that point of time. And that would be for more information to come forward, to give the evidence of the need for this to be incorporated and getting the balances right. But I think it will come in time. If it doesn't come this time, I think it will come in time.
Again, yeah, I sort of echo that. It needs an open discussion without, like John said, polarising the debate, because I think it is a very difficult subject to approach at the moment, as we've seen in other areas. It's going to be, I think it'd be a long road to get there.
It's interesting, and yeah, of course it is,
because you've got to respect the other points of view. It's difficult. I don't have the answer.
I'd just come back on that. I mean, I think the issue is one we're all going to have to grapple with, and that is when people want their rights, they need to recognise that with rights come responsibilities on both sides. And you need to balance that, because my rights may, independently, you may be able to justify that, but then they might impinge upon yours. So there needs to be a compromise and a balance somewhere. It's not the case that every right can be equally weighed in that way. So that's where the way in which we discuss this and come to our conclusion is really, really important.
Legislation to raise awareness in the community of discrimination on the island and the importance of educating ourselves, and on how to create a more inclusive society with equal opportunities for all. With the proposals now passed unanimously, it's imperative that the next elected candidates are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed within the proposed timeline, and that ensuring equality and equal opportunities is prioritised. So that's me. I'll just let Lexi do the introduction.
Hello, I'm Netty from Liberate, and I've been involved in the charity for quite some time, from its early stages actually, and I'm here to ask a generic question to all the candidates and then compare answers.
Okay, so I'll ask my question first. I don't know who wants to answer first. So for the legislation to be effective, do you think people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
Sadly, I think they probably do, yeah. I thought in this day and age that things should have been automatic, just sort of going around. Even speaking to parents that sort of going around, I know that isn't always the case. So, yeah, it does need not just legislation but training as well, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, same question. Yeah, certainly. I think you need to take business along with you when you're introducing legislation like this, so it's going to have a knock-on effect on business. If you don't, you're going to find yourself in a bit of trouble when it comes up to the debate and they haven't had any input, you haven't been taken along with it. But you talk about training, I think it's going to be important for States of Guernsey to take a lead on that really, and demonstrate to other businesses that it can be done, and it hasn't got to be burdensome.
I appreciate it being gradual, but bringing that into legislation to fix that.
I don't know if you want me to repeat the question.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the States,
Do you want the question repeated?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. Training, but obviously it's going to be too costly for business, because if they want to set aside half an hour a week, that's going to cost them money for staff and so on. So I'm not saying it should be voluntary, because there'll be lots of people saying, well, we're in that place where you want them to be, where you want people to be. So they're going to think, well, okay, well, I need to go for training. But the people that might think they need to should do it. It's better to go and incentivise people rather than tell people they've got to do it. So it's about proportionality, really. Yeah.
Do you want one question? Okay, so
Sorry,
my
can I actually ask, because I don't actually know the candidates from Ireland, so I don't know if anyone else does, but actually it's quite difficult to interpret how they're answering without even knowing fully
Should
who
we
they are.
introduce each other around the table?
Do you mind? Because it's actually difficult knowing how to interpret answers when you don't even know who's answering.
Okay. Sorry, what did you want to know about?
Just your names.
I'm Aaron Hawke.
Right.
Yeah. So working for the States at the moment, and I'm originally from Plymouth, and funnily enough, today literally become a Guern. It's got my notice
I've managed to read the other two name tags, but yeah, thank you.
No, I'm just thinking you've got a lot of
Okay, so my question, and it's been a contentious question within the discrimination legislation that's been discussed, is how would you look at dealing with the question of single-sex spaces? Are the trans side of the legislation, and I know this isn't actually one of the characteristics of the moment, but it's going to come back into the legislation. How would you deal with that?
Well, for me, the trans is how you identify yourself is basically what you are. So it's a question of how you are in your mind, basically. So if you're identifying as one of the things is the sort of issue with the toilets and such like that. It tends to be they sort of think, if you just take the usual example of a sort of male becoming a female, or identifying as female, they use these sort of female toilets, and yeah, that's simple as that.
How do you see that with single-sex spaces?
To be honest, if I was in the States and this was being debated, I'll be listening to everybody speak and probably taking a great deal on board. I don't know how to deal with same-sex spaces, to be honest. It's not something that I've given too much consideration to at this point. I'm not quite sure, I don't know if I fully understand the question with regard to same-sex spaces. It's like providing...
So it's places like, so one of the challenges, and there's a concern around this within the trans community.
Just a 1 minute warning.
Oh, sorry. And basically where people are being sort of told that they have to use the toilet at their birth sex, and how that isn't right. And so
that's going to be a difficult circle to square, really. If you're looking at.
I don't want to cut you off, but I mean,
well, I'm very much a live and let live person, so I think at the end of the day, if you want to frequent an establishment, if you want your business, just make 3 toilets, whatever is required.
And
Just do what
public toilets, how do you see that with public toilets and with charities such as Safer as well, where you've got refuge?
Yeah, so that's you want to make a legislation for all that exchange, which is fair enough. Really follow on from where you want to take it from there. So if everybody can have one, give them a different toilet. No, that's a bit expensive for architects as well, but live and let live. So
hello, good evening. I'm Simon Fairclough. I'm an independent candidate.
People come out of hereditary forms of slavery in India.
Hello, I'm Christopher Nicol. I'm an independent candidate as well.
We're proud of our charity because a lot of
So I'm Eva from the campaign group Guerns Against Discrimination, which formed earlier this year to push for the anti-discrimination legislation and to raise awareness in the community of discrimination on the island. With the proposals now passed unanimously, it's imperative that us, the next elected candidates, are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed within the proposed timeline, and but ensuring that equality and equal opportunities is prioritised.
And I am Lexi from Liberate.
Because some of us are actually involved.
We've each got a question for you. So, for the legislation to be effective, do you think that people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
Yeah, I don't mind starting. Yeah, I think education in any situation like this is fundamental. As an ex-teacher, as a retired teacher, one of the things that I made it a purpose for me to do was to educate youngsters with the hope that some of that education would actually filter upwards into their families. And I certainly had the kind of impression that that was happening to a large extent. I think really in terms of legislation, it's vital that people actually understand what it is that the legislation actually means. Otherwise, it's hollow. So education is fundamental to that.
Could you just repeat the question for me, please?
So for the legislation to be effective, do you think that people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the proposals and legislation has obviously been approved, but it needs to come back before the States. I don't want to see that derailed. But I do think that education and legislation go hand in hand. People have to be brought on board to understand why the States are legislating on anything. But particularly in this area, I think there have been a number of concerns from local businesses about the potential cost to some of these laws, but I think some very good work has been done to try and explain what the very many benefits of the laws are and some of the real advantages that they can have as businesses of this new legislation. So I think education and legislation go hand in hand.
Okay, so my question then, I'll give you a little bit of information before my question as well. So this is one of the potentially most difficult questions that's come up within the anti-discrimination legislation making, and it's not actually a part that's in this side, but it's going to come along. It's going to be added. It's likely that that's what next term. Okay. And it's in regards to the discrimination legislation. How will you respond to the challenge of trans people in single-sex spaces?
That's a very difficult question. It is. I think the fundamental situation really that people have to appreciate is we're dealing with human beings, and as human beings, everybody deserves to be treated equally, irrespective of anything, whether it's race, age, sex, whatever it is, whether it's a disability that's visual or that's hidden. The fundamental thing is we're human beings, and we've all got talents and gifts, and it would be folly to waste any of those by discriminating on any basis whatsoever. Does that really answer what you're asking, or do you want to?
Let's
go on, and then we'll.
Okay.
So Andrea's just joined. She's running a little bit late, so she's jumped in.
I've just come in.
Okay. Well, let me try and answer that. And it is a difficult question, and there are some challenges around that. But it's a little bit. I think back to sort of the answer to my other question, really. I think that we need to have conversations, and people. We need to engage the community and talk through some of these issues. I think often what happens when things go to the States and we have late amendments, all sorts of things are passed without people feeling that they're really have been consulted or taken on or issues taken on board. So I believe I'm right in saying that the issue you're talking about will come back to the States again. And when it does, I want to see a fully informed debate on the issue. I think too often States members go into debates and there hasn't been sort of consultation. COVID has muddied the waters, I think it's fair to say, on some of the issues that came back to the States late in the term, and people were claiming that we hadn't had all the consultation and conversations. I think on this issue and others like it, we need to open the floor to dialogue and hear everybody's point of view on this.
I'm gathering that you're talking about protected characteristic of gender Is that?
Yeah, so it's not in there at the moment, I believe, in the actual legislation, but it's likely that it's going to come up.
Well, the ESS committee, didn't they? They decided to bring certain of the characteristics, and there was ones that they didn't feel at the time was going to be able to be passed because of the debate that needs to happen in the consultation. So I absolutely agree with Simon. You know, we've had a lack of consultation and conversation about that particular characteristic, and it needs to be far more. It's a technical subject. It's obviously a very difficult and sensitive subject, and has been the cause of a lot of angst and upset for quite a time now, and that's clear. And I think that it needs to be handled well and maturely, and certainly the states needs to have as much information as possible in order to